Hello. So my research is on the Judeo-Persian and Iranian Jewish languages. Now we're going to talk about the migration patterns and historical periods of the language. So Jews have been living in Persia since biblical times. This is because Jews were conquered by the Babylonians in the 6th century BCE and were subsequently exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. However, after Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered the Babylonians, he allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem, but many stayed in Persia because of Cyrus's tolerance towards them. This policy is dictated in Cyrus's cylinder, which is shown on the left. Now, Jews who stayed in the Persian Empire largely switched from using Hebrew and Aramaic to using what is now called Old Persian. As Old Persian evolved into New Persian around the late 8th and early 9th century CE, many Jews tended to write New Persian with Hebrew script and infuse Judaica into the New Persian language. This written language is called Judeo-Persian. However, Judeo-Persian refers specifically to the written form, and there are many dialects of spoken Jewish Iranian languages, which will be discussed later on. All Jewish Iranian dialects face the same future, extinction with or without documentation. Not only are they threatened by migratory trends, especially after the 1979 revolution, wherein many Jewish Persians fled to Israel, the US, and parts of Europe, but their social status is also diminishing. Jews, especially the younger generation, regard their ancestors' language as inferior. They refuse to speak it and in many cases do not understand it at all. Now, the earliest Judeo-Persian text is a letter from Dan Ulick in western China, which is seen on the left. The letter deals with trade and was discovered in an old Buddhist temple dating to the second half of the 8th century CE. Another example of documentary evidence comes from the early 9th century CE of a brief inscription on a copper plate from India. Later and more impressive examples come from some of the great poets in the 13th and 14th centuries, such as Shahin and Emrani. For instance, Shahin forged an epic called Musa Nama, retelling the life of Moses with extensive detail. Now, compared to other Jewish languages such as Ladino or Yiddish, there's been much less research done on Judeo-Persian due to the Eurocentric literary and linguistic emphasis. The first of the Judeo-Persian texts to be recognized by the outside world was Yaqub ben Yusuf Tavus's translation of the Pentateuch. This text appeared in the Western world when Thomas Hyde transliterated it into Arabic script for Bishop Brian Walton's Polyglot Bible. It was not until the late 19th century when Elkin Adler collected Judeo-Persian manuscripts from Tehran, Bukhara, Samarkand, and various Janizas, and also from many individuals, and then sold this collection to be studied by Wilhelm Bacher of the Jewish Theological Seminary, that Judeo-Persian really gained lasting recognition in the Western world. Now, this occurred because the vast collection of about 600 pages of text from various genres such as Bible commentary, grammar, lexicon, Jewish law, medicine, magic, poetry, and liturgy, and also personal letters, finally provided a large enough source of literature to be extensively analyzed. It is also worth noting that although Judeo-Persian literature gained lasting recognition in the Western world, study of the Iranian Jewish languages that are spoken have received far less attention and is one of the reasons that these spoken languages are for the most part abandoned and moribund. Early Judeo-Persian texts are of the oldest known texts that used a New Persian syntax and grammar. The only difference is the small use of Hebrew and Aramaic loanwords in the Hebrew script. Thus, these early texts have provided some of the greatest insight into the lexical, grammatical, and syntactical shift from Old to New Persian. Now, Judeo-Persian and its various spoken Iranian dialects stem from the Indo-European language family consisting of Iranian and Persian. This language family includes Kurdish, Pashto, Ascetic, and many other smaller languages in Iran, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, and even Western China. The base language is Old Persian, and the previous language used was Aramaic, which was in Babylonia, with Hebrew and Aramaic textual components. It's also worth noting there are no other languages in contact. This was followed by New Persian, which is mainly written in Arabic characters, but is also written in Hebrew, Roman, or Cyrillic characters. The Jewish Iranian languages are very much co-territorial with New Persian, as New Persian is a national language and is the primary tool for education. Moreover, wherever Jews migrated, they adopted the local dialect of the city with a very small Hebrew and Aramaic component compared to the European Jewish languages. The Jewish Iranian languages come in many varieties depending on the region. Over the years, while the locals forgot or changed their dialect, the language spoken by the Jews remained similar to the original local dialect. For example, Judeo-Shirazi resembles the language of 14th century national poet Hafez much more than does New Persian. The pronunciations of Hebrew loanwords may or may not be maintained in the way it would be pronounced in Hebrew. For instance, the Judeo-Isfahani word for fasting, ta'anit, and the word for poor, ani, both lack the ayin sound in the Iranian Jewish languages. Regarding the integration of these words, the pronouns, adjectives, nouns, and a verbal basis may follow the Hebraic format, but the verbal endings, modal prefixes, suffix pronouns, and most of the particles, as well as sentence structure, are in Iranian format. As mentioned before, there is only a modicum of Hebrew and Aramaic components in Judeo-Persian, and for the most part, these Hebrew and Aramaic components are religious references. Some of the religious loanwords include Torah for Torah, Tefillit, Sisit, which are the ritual fringes, and Beracha, Hebrew for blessing. Additionally, Judeo-Persian has words for concepts related to weddings, such as arus for bride, aqd for wedding, and shadamand for groom. However, all these words are the same as in Persian proper. The only difference is the characters used to write them. Also, Judeo-Persian has words for various greetings, such as the Persian everyday salam, the Persian greeting for special occasions and holidays durodi, wherein the holiday's name may or may not precede the word durodi, such as in Shabbat durodi, including the particular greeting for Shabbat. It is worth noting that Shabbat represents a Hebrew loanword. Judeo-Persian also includes words for things used associated with non-Jews, such as goyim, meaning Gentile, and also in this case, goyim is a Hebrew loanword. Now, while most of the Iranian Jewish languages only exist in spoken form, the written Judeo-Persian language is written with Hebrew script. As most of the Hebrew loanwords are religious references, the actual Hebrew spelling of the words is usually used. However, scribes who at times may not know the actual spelling may simply use the phonetics of Hebrew language to sound out the spelling of the word. And seen on the left is a picture from the corpus of the 600 texts mentioned above, and on the right was found in a Jewish tombstone in Afghanistan dating to the 11th century. A common misconception is that all Iranian Jewish languages are collectively called Judeo-Persian, when in reality, Judeo-Persian specifically refers to the written forms of Persian with Hebrew script. Essentially, there are multiple spoken languages stemming from the Iranian stock, which include the southern Judeo-Persian languages, which include Bukhari, Johuri, and Judeo-Shirazi, and the northwestern Judeo-Median languages that have their core in central Iran, and are spoken by the Jews of Isfahan, Kashan, Hamadan, and other far western towns. These dialects differ greatly and are generally unintelligible because of differing accents, pronunciations, and vocabulary. For instance, Esfahanis, Shirazis, and Kashanis pronounce the S sound as the V phenome, which is a voiceless dental fricative, meaning you create friction between the tongue and the top teeth, and the Z sound as the Th phenome, which is the voiced version. In some of the cities closer to Iraq, such as Hamadan and Golpayan, Jews pronounce the phonemes h and k in Hebrew and Arabic words as in Arabic, and sometimes add them in Persian, Hebrew, and Aramaic words where they do not exist. Additionally, the stress in Judeo-Yazdi is generally penultimate, as opposed to being ultimate in Persian and other Jewish Iranian dialects. Other differences come from vocabulary, such as the word for large, which in Persian proper is bozorg or gondeh, while it is Masar in Hamadani, Mas or Gondo in Yazdi, and Gunda in Shirazi. Moreover, because women have far less access to education, they have a much lower opportunity to learn the national Persian language written in Arabic script. Thus, they will tend to speak the more regional dialects, and for Jewish women, that will include the Iranian Jewish dialects. However, because men have greater access to literary materials, they are more likely to implement Hebrew and Aramaic loanwords into their speech than the women are. Essentially, the men become superior in both the national Persian language and the Jewish Iranian dialects. Interestingly, Jewish Persians once had a secret language called Loterai, the language which mainly used Persian grammar but was heavily influenced by Hebrew and Aramaic, was used by Jews when wanting to converse without non-Jewish understanding and when they were speaking about things mainly dealing with business. An example of a Hebrew component is the first person singular I being ani. Now we're going to listen to a sound clip of Judeo-Persian. Now, regarding the contemporary status, although there are considerable numbers of Iranian Jews in the US, about 60 to 80,000, and in Israel, about 200 to 250,000, and also it's worth noting that there's only about 10,000 Jews living in Iran, the Iranian Jewish languages are rare. And as Habib Bourgian asserts, they are on the verge of disappearing, and no reliable data exists on the number of speakers. In fact, the written form of Judeo-Persian is classified as abandoned, and the spoken forms of Judeo-Persian and the Judeo-Median languages are considered moribund. In general, Iranian Jews speak Standard Persian with some Hebrew loanwords. The reality relates back to the fact that with the advent of modern education in Iran in the 20th century, most Iranian Jews gave up the Jewish Iranian languages. Thus, the vernacular use of these Iranian Jewish languages are limited, and unfortunately, most non-scholars don't even know of the existence of these Iranian Jewish languages, leading to little or no post-vernacular engagement with the language. And this is the end. Thank you for listening.